Hey everybody, it's Atheist for the Cause here, and I wanted to bring you another article review about Otto Warmbier, the American who died at the hands of North Korea. And I found this political article that it's pretty interesting. It's got a lot of new information I didn't know, and I just wanted to go over it. So it's a really long article. I took some notes to try to cut it down, so let's get into it. It says there were guides that were constantly drunk. Basically, what you do is you get these Western guides. That's how you get your trip into North Korea. Apparently, it's relatively easy to get your visa and all of that. And then you meet up with some North Korean guides, and the Western guides show you around, but the North Korean guides keep an eye on you, is effectively what happens. And there are apparently tens of thousands that tour North Korea annually, including about 1,000 Americans. And this is important because it shows, people say, why would any American go into North Korea? Well, effectively, what he did isn't actually all that rare, and normally it's quite safe. Now, obviously, I use safe with an asterisk next to it because things can happen, but typically Americans are just fine touring North Korea, and foreigners, especially Chinese, like tens of thousands, do it every year. Of the 1,000 Americans a year that visit North Korea annually, only 15 have been detained since 2009. Although the trend is going upwards since the new leader got into power, because most of them were under the new leader, which I think it's had 2011 for him that he took office. It says of those 15 Americans who were detained, some were detained because they snuck in, which is breaking the law, and some were because they proselytized, which you can't do in North Korea. Then there's one of the people said that knew Otto said that the reason he went into North Korea was because he wanted to have an adventure. And they said that there was this one situation where he was having fun with another tourist, and they were reminded basically that they couldn't take pictures of military. So instead they acted like they were taking pictures of each other, but they were actually taking pictures of the soldiers. And apparently he got actually pretty nervous about this, and it was never reported to authorities or anything. Nothing ever happened at the time, but it shows that he was actually trying to be responsible in the sense that when they did do that, he was nervous. He wasn't like some ignorant guy, just acting stupid. Now, that can't be said for everybody in the group, however, and this is where it gets really interesting, because Otto may very well have been innocent from some of this information that's coming out. Is that this other Brit ended up going, well, I've got it here. I'll just read the exact words. It says, but then something fucking crazy happened. The American told me Danny Granton, a Brit in his mid-40s, takes a balloon on a string from some kid, waves the balloon up and down, and like the Pied Piper, a bunch of North Koreans start following him, says the American, who says he was the only foreigner who joined along. The two men engaging with the North Koreans, happy and laughing, strolled around the area for roughly half an hour. The American then decided to turn back and rejoin the group, but Granton he's the Brit, he kept walking and found himself on a dark street alone. And that's actually illegal because you have to be with a guide when you're touring North Korea. In any other part of the world, this would not be noteworthy, but North Korea is the world's most closed country, and guides tightly monitor Western tourists. This kind of vanishing act is extremely rare. Over the last decade, I've spoken with dozens of Western tourists and have visited North Korea, and I have never found anything like this happening. The North Korean guides were panicked. They were so scared, asking us, "Have you seen him? Have you seen him?" And we included the Western guides were too drunk to realize the seriousness of the situation. The first participant told me, "Danny got separated from the group. Ben Johnson, who now works with the Young Pioneer as guide, confirmed. There was really thick fog that night." The American remembers the North Korean guides concerned and angry. They asked him, "Where's Danny? Is he drunk? What do you mean? He's gone?" The tourists waited in the square for hours until their guides eventually returned them to the hotel. Granton took this is again the Brit, took several taxis and made it back sometime early in the morning, according to the American who says he saw him walk back into the hotel. What makes this event especially notable is the British tourist. By the way, the American is not Otto. It's a different American that wanted to remain anonymous. What makes this event especially notable is that the British tourist disappearance roughly coincides with the time Warmbier allegedly tried to steal the propaganda poster from the hotel, raising questions about whether those two events are related. North Korea is an incredibly opaque place, and at this stage it's impossible to draw conclusions. And yet the overlap of Granton's disappearance and Warmbier's alleged theft is bizarre. The one thing that definitely surprised me about the trip was that how on New Year's Eve the North Koreans pretty much let us roam free and disperse, especially after watching us pretty closely up until that point, the American said. That's how Danny and I ended up being able to walk off by ourselves. So this it sounds like this Brit was extremely immature and was causing problems. And there's actually more to be curious about, but I'll get to that later. So this shows that, and the other thing is, in the actual video, one of my old videos shows it. It did look like Warmbier did it because someone goes up and pulls the poster down. It's pretty clear, but the only thing that's not really clear is the identity. The camera is not very good, so and it's kind of far away, so the one question I did have in that video was, you can't really make out the identity very well. And it very well could have been this Brit guy. Given that he returned to the hotel room around the same time that this incident happened. Oh, and by the way, did I mention that he was the roommate of Otto Warmbier at the time that they went on this tour together? And at the time of this event, they were actually roommates. So these are some pretty serious questions. So then there was another situation here where a tax guide actually hid a passport, causing one of the tourists to be interrogated. And this goes to how these tourists were, getting drunk and acting really immature. And it led to, problems on the trip. Now, most of the drinking they did was at night, after hours, and during the day they were able to do their tour and all of that. But you have to think that if they weren't drinking so much and partying so much, that they would have paid closer attention to the tourists. No, there was actually a review done, And let's read this. It says, "My husband and I joined the YPT New Year's Party Tour and Pyongyang helicopter joyride option trip in December of 2015. We had wonderful experiences with YPT group while inside the DPRK. We had a great group with people from around the world and also had very good YPT and local guides during our trip. However, we had a horrible experience during the immigration process on the return train from Pyongyang to Beijing. No, DPRK soldiers come on the train during the border crossing and collect everyone's passport, visa, declaration form, and exit form. They take them away and perform the immigration process, then come back and forth to validate the document and perform physical checking, finally returning passport cabin by cabin to the passengers on the train at the end of the process." And remember, these soldiers are they're serious. You don't mess with this situation, with this process. A guy in the adjacent cabin, she puts guy in quotes, so a guy in the adjacent cabin who we had never met during one tour was wrongly returned my husband's passport during the return process. Instead of handing it back to the soldiers, he decided to knowingly withhold it as a joke. So when the soldiers arrived at our cabin, of course they couldn't find my husband's passport. Our YPT guide was in the same cabin as the guy and knew that he had taken our passport. But instead of saying something immediately or even after the soldiers confronted us, YPT guide let it continue. One of the people in our cabin spoke Korean and helped us to talk to the soldiers and attempted to fix it. Meanwhile, the YPT guide and the guy who were still sitting in the adjacent cabin did nothing to help us. This is extremely immature. And dangerous. The soldiers took it very seriously and gave us a very hard time, speaking sternly to us about our missing travel document. They proceeded to segregate my husband, prohibit me to approach or even talk to him. I actively sought help from YPT guide and went to guide's cabin. YPT guide proceeded to tease and embarrass me with the guy in front of others in our group. Panicking still, I was running between cabins, searching for the passport and trying to further understand my husband's deteriorating situation. He was being interrogated here, and you never know when this may escalate. YPT guide used to make fun of me during the tour in front of the group, which was absolutely fine with me, really. However, in this situation, it was not funny. That's totally understandable. Finally realizing it had gone too far, they called me to the cabin to return the passport. But before they handed it over, they proceeded to tease me further. Completely inexcusable at this point. My husband was in the custody of DPRK soldiers. When I finally showed the passport to the soldiers, they insisted we all went to the guide's cabin and speak. The soldiers and the guide talked in Korean, and of course I had no clue of what they say, but apparently the soldiers didn't think it was funny either. No kidding. It's not funny. The incident was over and we collapsed. It was so stressful and tense, and I was crying waterfalls at this point. The emotions were a complicated mix of irritation, anger, panic, insult, and even embarrassment. Can you put yourselves into our shoes? Passport lost in DPRK during returning immigration process, a huge language barrier with no joking around soldiers, segregation, and the one who you are paying to get you safely and securely into the DPRK ganged up on you with a complete stranger in a different cabin and stole your travel documents? Do you know your job? Do you take it seriously? What a horrible experience at the end of such a lovely trip thus far. Well, when you say it like that, holy shit, it sounds even worse. I had it in my head as this horrible thing, and then she says it like this, and you just can feel all the chips stacking up against her. And this is a terrifying, traumatic, like legitimately traumatic experience. Later on, YPT Guide and the guy came to our cabin to explain the whole story, what had happened behind the scenes, and apologize. YPT Guide claimed the guy is a close friend of the leader in DPRK, has strong connection and privilege in DPRK. He purposefully kept my husband's passport to pull a joke on the soldiers. Yeah, right, those guys were not joking around. We clearly explained that we thought their behavior was totally unacceptable. The guy thought the whole incident lasted for several minutes and it was not a big deal. In my mind, it lasted years. The guy further added he pulled the same joke on a German and they were not upset. He explained to us that it was due to cultural differences. So what, you scared me to death? You withheld my husband's passport, and you were apologizing with this racist comment as your defense? I don't know if he was being racist or not, but it's possible, but I don't think that part really matters. Regardless of that guy's stupid actions, we are most offended and concerned by the actions of the YPT Guide. We see your customer, and regardless of what you think of our race or our culture or sex or just personally, we paid YPT for a service to get us to the DPRK and back safely and positively. And while 99% of the time YPT Guide was very competent, you failed on the last 1% miserably, and when we needed you the most. You not only were not there to help us, but purposely misled us. Knowingly let a stranger access my husband's passport with his personal information, teased and embarrassed me in front of others, and had us very concerned about our safe return home. For this reason, the rating must be terrible without a doubt. Now, I can't think of a more thoughtful and well-written post review here, and there's even plenty of credit. Like, it was 99% great but 1% miserable. It's completely logical and helpful. So that's what happened, and that just really sums up what Otto was going through with the tour guides. Like, this wasn't Otto himself, but this is the kind of stuff that was happening with the guides that Otto went with. So, apparently, though, it gets worse. The guides didn't even realize that Otto wasn't, when they were going back to the plane to try to leave. They didn't even realize that Otto Warmbier wasn't there. And now there's a little discrepancy. The guide claims that she was the last one on and waited as long as she could, but it was clear he wasn't coming, so she got on and left. Other people who I believe the other people claim she got on first and didn't even know he wasn't on until somebody else asked where he was. And now, to make this even more interesting, guess who saw Otto get detained at the airport and didn't say anything? The British guy who was his roommate. He was the only one to apparently see Otto get detained. Now, why would you just keep your head down and not say anything? Maybe if you knew you were the one that pulled the poster down, right? And you didn't want to get detained, because he was likely drunk at the time, and then when he became sober, he was probably like, oh shit, what'd I do? And he would, my guess is he was happy to let Otto take the fall for his actions. So then and another interesting thing, too, about this is this British guy, he did one interview with the Washington Post, and then he didn't do any other interviews. So he's definitely trying to keep his head down. But the father criticized Obama, and thanked Trump for for getting him released, and that's kind of interesting. Apparently, President Obama was more interested in talking about regional politics and inaction, according to the father. And even some within the Obama administration admitted that while they were talking about Otto Warmbier, there wasn't a whole lot to talk about because they didn't have a whole lot of information. And that if they had known the health situation of Otto Warmbier, they could have had a greater sense of urgency. And that just really pisses me off. You don't have a great sense of urgency for an American detained in North Korea. You should assume his health is at risk. You shouldn't. Why would you assume his health is good? You should assume his health is at risk. And I think that really sums up. I voted for Obama twice, and I had defended him for a long time. But the more that comes out, it's just becoming harder and harder to defend him. And I do not think the future is going to look back on President Obama favorably at all. Now, Dennis Rodman, who is close with Kim Jong-un, claims that he actually helped to get Otto released. He alleges that he asked 3 times, and he was actually in North Korea when Otto got released. Now, the Trump administration is saying it wasn't Dennis Rodman. I don't think it really matters. I think the Trump administration wants the credit for it, and there's probably a solid chance Dennis Rodman at least brought it up. But I mean, it happened under Trump's watch. Trump deserves credit, and whether Rodman also deserves credit or not, honestly, that doesn't matter to me that much. The important thing is we got him back before he passed away, and that will help the family have some finality and help them grieve and move on someday from the situation. Not where they ever forget Otto or anything like that, but where they can, hopefully live a reasonably happy life in the future going forward. And not let this situation define them. It's a lot harder, I think, if say he died in North Korea and they never got his body back or anything like that. You'd have so many questions. Now there was also a little last part that said some of the people that had talked to him got the impression that Otto was really overwhelmed in Beijing, and I don't know why he was overwhelmed or anything like that. And who knows? Maybe part of the reason Otto went on this tour to North Korea was to get away from China, because maybe he was struggling in China. Because let's not forget, Otto Warmbier did not go to North Korea from the United States. He went to China. I believe it was Hong Kong, actually. And then he went on a tour from there to North Korea. And the tour was meant to be a short, 5-day thing. And this is something, 1,000 Americans do a year. Tens of thousands of foreigners do a year. Mostly Chinese people. So, and there's only been 15 people detained, like I said. So it has been relatively safe in the past. And maybe he just wanted to get away. Who knows? But these are some of the new facts. There's more here if you want to read it all, but I went over most of the important and new stuff. And this is a tragic event, but hopefully we can decapitate the North Korean leadership at some point, and hopefully this doesn't happen again in the near future. I'll talk to you guys later.